Okay, hey, welcome to this edition of Dr. Bryant Speaks. You know, I say it all the time, but I have to remind you, this show, what it's about and why we're here. We're here to support the military veterans. We're here to support the families. We're here to support the people who support the military. My name is Dr. Bryant. I am a veteran. I was with the United States Army Airborne Rangers Special Ops Unit. I'm also a university professor, among other things. But more importantly, I am your host. Now, if you're new to listening to this broadcast, I want to say welcome and thank you for tuning in. I always repeat that because notice that our audience is growing and growing and growing. And I want to say how much I appreciate that. And I say that to also those who are coming back. You guys are giving me all sorts of insights, information on all of our podcast channels, and those are obviously growing as well because we're now crossed over into about 8 different podcast channels, and I really want to say thank you. We also have our videos on YouTube, and that's where you can see a lot of the details and information about our guests. So on that note, I want to introduce an amazing guest today. She is a legislative analyst, but she's also more than that. And it's going to be a very interesting topic that we're going to go over. So, you know what, audience? I'm going to say welcome to a very special person. Her name is Stephanie Collada. Stephanie, say hello.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah. So, Stephanie, this is pretty amazing. You and I had talked previously, and we had some technical issues, and we rescheduled this amazing podcast. And as I told you off record, I have been looking forward to us having this conversation again because the topics that we're going to cover could not be more important. And so, let's kind of ease our way into it. And I want you to give everybody a little bit of information about who you are, talk about your education, and more importantly, talk about your military background.
Okay. Well, hi, everybody. Stephanie Collada. I'm originally from Florida, and right now I'm in beautiful St. Petersburg. And my military background, I am a 15-year Army Reserve retired veteran. I was forced into retirement due to my health. It happens to a lot of people and disabilities. But for that, I was originally an ammunition specialist and then a transportation coordinator. The most amazing thing that I did with that job was actually load ships for the Army out of Kuwait for 17 months. And it is the busiest military port ever. And we like to compare it to billion-dollar Tetris, trying to fit everything on the ship. So high stress situation. And then I moved on. And after that time frame, I became a military technician, a DoD civilian for the Army Reserve. I did that for 10 years. I've had every position for the staff and the training, from battalion up to 2-star general. I've actually worked in 2 different 2-star staffs, the 412th Engineer Command and the Medical Command, MedCom. So it was an amazing experience and it taught me a lot. I was a sexual assault response coordinator for a brigade underneath the 416th Theater Engineer Command. And you learn a lot, and you learn how to pretty much approach sexual assault and sexual harassment in that type of atmosphere. In that command with engineers, they are, like to say, 1 digit off of being an infantryman. So as a woman, dealing with that type of atmosphere was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I could imagine. You said the sexual assault and the background that you actually worked in. Was there any kind of training that was required of you? I would hope they wouldn't just say, "Oh, you're a female. You know about this," especially in the military, because let's be honest, we know a lot of it goes on. Did you have to actually get some education in this field to help you deal with it on both sides? And what I mean by that is either managing a victim or interviewing an actual suspect person. What kind of background or training did you go through?
So SARCs, Sexual Assault Response Coordinators, and victim advocates, they both go to a 2-week course. And they are in many different military bases. Ironically, I went to the one in Fort Hood in 2015. So I was already aware of a lot of the things that go on because the instructors there actually were victim advocates and sexual assault response coordinators in the organizations in Fort Hood. So they already had their own background experience to tell us what goes on and what has gone on. And this was actually within a couple of months after they found the prostitution ring on Fort Hood. So yes, we learned quite a lot. And the classmates we had were from all over the Army in different aspects. They were National Guard, they were Reserve, and they were active duty. We even had a Special Forces guy from Guillen that was in the course and shared some interesting stories. So yes, a lot of training. And I never really got into the interviewing the suspect or the subject is what they usually call them. They call them the subject. I usually call them perpetrator because that's what most people identify them as. And but no, I would never actually interview them. My focus is about the victim and making sure that the victim receives all the rights that he or she is supposed to have and process the reports and what have you. One of the other things that I had to do was also ensure that we had the right amount of victim advocates and sexual assault response coordinators. It is a very difficult thing for, at least my experience in the Army Reserve, is to actually maintain the required amount of victim advocates and sexual assault response coordinators. At the time, I was a training schools guru on making sure how to get people into schools. So that's how I got tagged or voluntold to become a sexual assault response coordinator. It's because I know how to get people into those schools. And it requires a lot of paperwork, a lot of screening, background screening, and finally a certificate from NOVA, which I forget the acronym now, but I can look it up because without that NOVA certificate, you cannot actually process a report.
Now you mentioned you're on one side when making sure and supporting the advocates. I would imagine maybe the investigators, either CID or some version of an investigator, was the one probably doing the interviewing. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is. It would be CID. For sexual harassment, it would be a investigator from your actual unit, from your chain of command, because they would do they will do an IG or an investigation into any sexual harassment claims. And I have prepared a few of those people before because they either love to assign lieutenants, either 01 or 02, and they would also assign people that are brand new to the unit, because that one I recommend, especially if they're in a major and a captain rank, they don't have any ties with any of the organizations that needs to be investigated. So you pick the newest person so then they can be the most
neutral.
What was that?
You said neutral, maybe the most neutral.
Yes.
Yeah. They don't have any biasness. They don't know anybody. They haven't built any political relationships. Yeah.
Or at least we hope so, because the Army Reserve is a small world.
That's true. Yeah. Good point. That's a good point.
That's something that we make sure that happens.
Interesting. It's very interesting to know how much of this goes on behind the scenes. Now, before we get into a little bit more specifics, I want to ask something that I thought was kind of important. And how long did it take for us to get to this point? Because everything you just said, the logistics behind what you just talked about, seems like this is very organized. I mean, you're making sure you got advocates, you making sure the investigators are fresh off the, out of the officers candidate school. You're kind of organized to ensure that we can get to the bottom of things. However, as a veteran myself and like yourself, we know that this hadn't always been the case. So is this something fairly new that's been put in place to improve, or has the military always been doing things pretty good in this area. We just haven't heard much about it because maybe victims don't really speak up.
Right. It is, there is that stigma that victims don't speak up, but this has been something very big ever since the 70s and 80s. There actually was the oldest congressional hearing script that I do have on sexual assault and sexual harassment is from 1992, which is a friend of mine who leads the legislative committee in the Military Women's Coalition, and that's Diana Danis. And she spoke about her own background and everything like that. Well, the organization and the rules and regulation that I went off of was actually from the 2013 hearings. Another friend of mine, Brian Lewis, who is a male military sexual trauma victim himself, have also spoke on. And the most recent rules that I had acted on was based off of what came out of those hearings in 2013.
Wow. Oh, well, you know what? Then kudos to the military. That's news to me. I always kind of felt like they really did not have their act together, but I'm glad to hear that they have always been prepared, which is great. Probably better than the civilians, to be honest. So let's not delay the elephant in the room, if you will. Although we are virtual, I want to talk about one of the biggest topics right now related to sexual harassment, and that's Specialist Vanessa Guillen. Now, I'm going to, we understand it was reported out of Fort Hood, which is interesting because you said, ironically, your training was there and where you were assigned. And this is back in April of, can you remind the audience what year this was?
April 2020.
Yeah, so it wasn't that long ago. And her case inspired a lot of protests. It even got caught the attention of the president, in which I understand he did invite the family to the White House. But I would say, unfortunately, but probably more importantly, the Army actually had to discipline more than a dozen officials. And I don't know if we can get into that later, but I definitely, if that's possible, I want to talk about that. But more importantly, the bill obviously is named I Am Vanessa Guillen, and it was after the hashtag. We understand that. And basically it encouraged military members to talk about their own sexual harassment and their sexual assault experiences. And that's kind of what this bill led into. Now, I understand it's in early stages, but if it's passed, and I know we're going to get into it, it will create a third-party agency to which active duty members could report allegations of sexual harassment and sexual assault. That's huge. That is huge. So I'm really excited. And you know what I'm more excited about? And I don't mean to take your thunder, but I want to kind of give the audience background. But it's interesting that, politicians and lawmakers have conveyed their disappointment. And that was actually Vice President Biden has been quoted to be probably one of the biggest advocates. And yet he's now president. So that's kind of a good thing. That's a good thing. So I would hope that would push things in the right direction.
He actually signed a pledge before he even swore in. The Military Women Coalition and a few other organizations have asked him to sign a pledge to fix or at least work on this military sexual trauma and military sexual violence that happens. And he signed it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's amazing.
I hope you have been enjoying the show. Well, do not go anywhere just yet. We have a continuing episode with Dr. Bryant Speaks.